In a gritty neighborhood gym where ego and muscle are currency, Nadia, a quiet, habitual cleaner who bakes empanadas for the trainers, has learned to live small and ordinary after a past that no one here suspects. When Leo, the gym's brash black belt showman, dares her into the ring as a joke to prove how little a simple woman can do, the dare cuts deeper than humor. What follows is not a spectacle of humiliation but a slow, beautiful unspooling of memory, courage, and technique that silences the entire gym. Through a single fight, the story explores assumptions and power, the hard muscles of regret and the softer ones of redemption, and the way a single ordinary life can be extraordinary when given back its voice. The light in Atlas Gym slanted in peculiar ways. Through the industrial windows it arrived as theatrical shafts, dust motes suspended like a congregation of small, pious things. In the mornings the light found the boxing ring first, then the bags, then the stretching mats where a handful of regulars practiced their rituals. By evening it settled into the corners and the scent of liniment, and the gym belonged to the fluorescent glow and the sound of fists against leather. Nadia moved through that light like a habit. She was the woman who arrived before dawn most days, a paper bag of empanadas tucked under her arm, a roll of towels over one forearm, a broom in the other. People called her Nadia or Nad. In passing, never with any particular emphasis. She wore thrift, shop cardigans mended at the elbows, and her hands were a map small, knuckled, with a pale patch on the right thumb where a burn had turned the skin into a thin scar. She hummed as she worked, a quiet rhythm that matched the clink of hooks on chains and the zip of a speed bag. She listened more than she spoke. On paper, she was nothing remarkable. In the ledger of the gym she was staff, part-time cleaner, part-time vendor of breakfast, an uncomplicated figure in the background. People liked the empanadas. People took for granted the coffee she left steaming at Marco's desk each morning. Marco, the gym owner, always left a dollar coin on the counter for her, a silent way to say thank you without making a fuss about how much he didn't like fuss. Marco ran Atlas like a man who had once been run through by life and come out the other side with an honest collection of scars. He was in his early 60s, shoulders broadened by years of swinging at heavy bags, a silver eyebrow raised more often than not. He had been a bantamweight with a name in the city in the 70s, a reputation that retired slowly and reluctantly. His face had the same weathered softness as the canvas of the ring, a trade-worn map of where punches had landed. He kept a small radio under the counter for boxing reruns and made black coffee that tasted like promises. Leo came in later than Nadia, entering as the gym filled. He wore confidence like a second skin, the kind that made people sit up a bit straighter when he spoke. At 29, he was Atlas's prize, a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and the quickest hands on the sparring mat. He taught classes, he posted videos of takedowns with Johnny captions, and he could always be counted on to demonstrate a move or two when the gym needed livening up. He had a grace in falling that made the audience breath hitch. He had a slickness, a neat haircut, designer sweatshirts, the kind of smile that halved a room. There were small fissures in Leo's polish. He liked to be seen as the best. He liked people to know they were watching him. He had a history of stroking his ego with cheap bravados, taunting newer fighters, offering lessons with a condescending grin, betting on outcomes he thought were already settled. He had the memory of his father's absence in the small, brittle things he said, the need to own the ring, because someone had once told him he didn't belong anywhere. Amara was younger than the rest, a trainee who came to the gym with the kind of hunger that was almost visible, bone deep and practiced. She was 19, long-limbed, a runner who had turned to kickboxing to manage a restless energy. She had the keen, curious face of an apprentice, sometimes impatient, mostly earnest. She liked to train with Leo and watched him with the reverence of someone learning grammar from a poet. The morning, Leo asked. It was during the lull between classes. The regulars had filed out after an early sparring session, and the gym felt larger without the constant friction of bodies. Nadia was at the far end of the mats, folding laundry into a trolley. Marco was behind the counter with the day's receipts. Leo and Amara were at the ring, half lounging on the ropes, half arguing about footwork like old men who took their quarrels to a seminar.
You know,
Leo said. The kind of, that preceded a demonstration. A woman's self-defense is a good thing. He looked toward Naya like a television host selecting an accidental contestant. But there's a difference between self-defense and actually taking a punch, right? Depends, Amara said, not looking up from her notes. Depends what you mean by actually. Landing one punch doesn't mean. What I mean, Leo cut in, is that most people would be surprised how easy it is to overwhelm someone who isn't trained. You just close the distance and pin them. That's all it takes. It landed in the gym like a stone. Marco glanced up, an eyebrow lifting. Nadia stiffened in the way someone does when the wind changes and an old ache speaks up. The sound of the machines and ropes seemed to be damped, as if someone had smothered the room with a blanket. Here's an experiment, Leo said, half laughing, his smile the sort that made everything feel performative. Nadia, why not you? Come up for 5 minutes. Show them how fragile the average person is. No gloves, no rules. Just come and let me show a live demo. There was laughter from two corners, not cruel exactly, but an immediate compartmentalization of what Nadia was, the obvious choice for spectacle, because she was, in the eyes of these men, the plainest object to toss up. It would be good, he said, for the new people. Reality check. Nadia felt the small coin at her sternum, the familiar, pulsing weight of obligation. She could refuse. She could sweep a counter faster and be invisible. She could say she did not like the idea of being the centerpiece of mockery. Yet when she looked at Leo, something in him annoyed her. Not his arrogance, exactly, but the way he assumed absence where there was a life. There was a tone to the dare that had the sharpness of a door closing on someone's dignity. Marco watched her with the same careful patience he used when dealing with a broken ankle. He had known Nadia longer than most. She had worked here more than 5 years, maybe 8. Marco had a memory tucked away. He had once seen her on a fight card, years ago, in the nights when the ring ran different bloodlines and different promises. He had not told the others. He had kept secrets tucked into the corners like his old boxing gloves. No, Nadia said first. It was small, but it cut the soundscape. Leo laughed and waved a hand dismissively. Come on. Don't be afraid. It's just for fun. You heard her, Amara said brightly, trying to rescue the moment. Nadia, it'll be quick. It'll be. It's not a comedy, Nadia said. The trolley of towels shuddered as she pushed a little harder. Her voice had a grain to it that hadn't been there before. Leo blinked, a fraction thrown off by the answer not fitting his expectation. He wanted to win this morning as much as he wanted to win any other morning. To Leo, everything was binary: the display and the applause, the ranking. When Nadia refused, it was a personal affront, a thing to be returned. He let that hungry thing operate in his chest. All right then, he said, too quickly. You want to make a point? I'll make one. I'll fight anyone, even if they're a cleaner. The word cleaner dropped like a glove. Calculated theatrical disdain. It's not about titles, Nadia said. Titles, he scoffed. Nobody here's defending titles except me. He climbed into the ring with the practiced ease of someone who had been given the whirl in filtered light. It wasn't meant to be cruel. It was meant to be spectacle. It was meant to show something easy. A display of mastery the kind that didn't require humility. Nadia felt fury peel across her for a heartbeat that was long enough to make the muscles under her ribs feel hot. She set down the trolley and walked toward the ring. No one in the gym moved to stop her. She stepped into the ring barefoot. The canvas was rough under her soles. It smelled like sweat and old leather and the memory of fights that had been both small and enormous. She had not put on gloves. She had not wrapped her hands. She could have run, could have fled, but something in her wanted a different currency than invisibility. The gym quieted as if sound itself wanted to lean in. Leo grinned. He had the lightness of someone who thinks he can predict the catalog of events. He adopted a stance polished by demonstrations and camera angles, posture light, hands open, gentlemanly. Nadia, by contrast, had the posture of a person who carries small weights in their chest for years. Her arms were not held like a fighter's. They were held the way you hold a gate before closing it. Attentive, ready to meet pressure. Her breath was a rhythm learned in kitchens and corridors, not in a gym. She smelled faintly of coriander and coffee. "You sure?" Leo asked. His voice loosened as if the crowd's attention was gold, and he resented the idea of losing anything to its pull. "Yes," she said. "Just teach your lesson, if it makes you feel better." The bell did not ring. No one wanted a formal start. The first contact was a grazed knuckle. Leo's hand, reaching in too quick, found the side of her wrist, and Amara held her breath. Nadia responded the way someone returned a coin they had meant to spend, with the slide of a practiced wrist. She did not throw a wild haymaker. She corrected an imbalance as if she were rearranging a vase that had been slightly askew on a table. She stepped to the side and guided Leo's motion, a subtle redirection of force that required no force from her. A small sound, like a held exhale, moved through the gym. Marco's hand, white, knuckled around the counter edge. In the ring, Leo found himself undone by movement that was not brute but precise. Nadia's shoulder dipped. She used leverage, an old geometry of bodies, the kind of logic that insists on angle and timing. She was not trying to hurt him. She was trying to show him the room he thought he owned. They traded a sequence of holds and slips that were polite at first and then increasingly intimate in their negotiation. Nadia's footwork was quiet and efficient. She set traps like a gardener setting snares. Each time Leo lunged with theatricality, she dissolved his intention into balance and breath. When he attempted a roll, she caught his collar and moved with him, not against him, redirecting his momentum like a river around a stone. He came at her with the quick, flashy motions he used on cameras. She neutralized them with the minimal movements of someone who knew where pain could be avoided and where it needed to be dished back for clarity. "You have hands," Marco said, standing. Nadia's face was an even plane, not jubilant, not triumphant. Her eyes were steady. The audience had the odd sensation of seeing a man undressed of pretenses, not by violence, but by someone making violence unnecessary. Leo's jaw tightened. He was not used to being shown an inside he had not earned. "Why didn't you tell us?" Amara asked later, after the pair had spent a flurry of minutes that felt like hours to the watchers. The question fluttered out like tissue. Marco did not answer at first. He watched Nadia gather her towels. She was methodical, as if the fight had been another form of housekeeping. The bell of silence stretched and then broke into murmurs. People asked about old fights and pro careers, and names were mentioned like secret codes. Nadia let the murmurs wash over her. She moved as if the ring were no more than a place you stood in to wait for rain. She told them, finally, in small words. She had trained as a teenager in a community center that used to host afternoon bouts. Names of coaches fell out like small stones. She had fought because there had been an immediate, unromantic need to be hard in a world that did not readily spare kindness. She had left the ring, she said, After a fight that ended with both a broken jaw and a promise. A promise that she would never let fighting define whether she had value. She had traded gloves for an apron and towels and coffee. Her life was simple now because she had chosen simplicity. There were few dramatic confessions. No one fell to their knees. The gym's silence was not the silence of saints, but the silence of recognition. Leo learned more in an hour than the gram of sweat could teach, that strength was not a single currency, that humility could be a kind of finesse. There was a bruised space on his forearm where Nadia had eased his balance, an H that felt like a portal to a new kind of measurement. He did not storm or sulk. He was more perplexed. The world had cracked a bit for him and shown an unexpected seam. He had thought the ring's respect could be demanded through spectacle. Nadia had given him a different demand. Earn it. He had to sit with his discomfort and ask. Quietly later, in the kitchen where Nadia folded towels, if she had once wanted titles. She looked at him the way people look at old maps, not to find themselves, but to understand the lines.
Yes,
She said. Once. But wanting it and needing it are not the same. And why stop? He asked. The question hung between them, small and reckless. Because everything costs, she said. And sometimes the price is louder than the victory. He nodded like someone who had read a sentence and needed to stop and look up a word. For the first time, he listened without a retort. He was young enough to change. After that day, the shape of the gym did not shift so much as the air inside it changed temperature. People adjusted their movements. Conversations about who could beat who had a softer edge. Leo, who had been the loudest of their bravado, began to teach with a touch less pretense. He learned to ask more and announce less. Amara lingered more in training, soaking up the modest manner of technique that Nadia had shown in 200-minute exchanges. Nadia, for her part, resumed her days of cleaning and delivering empanadas. She smiled without the habitual shrink of her shoulders. People began to ask her about classes. It was small at first. 3 women from a neighborhood co-op, then more. They were the mothers who had wanted to know how to hold their children when the world pushed, the clerks who traveled late and wanted a measure of security. She taught them not to fight like men and not to be invisible. She taught them small geometries, how to shift a hand, how to breathe through an impact, how to recover dignity. Some of them cried in the corner of the gym as they learned to stand up again. Marco watched her with a softness he had kept in his pockets for too long. He pulled out an old trophy once and set it on the counter where Nadia could see it. He did not say what it meant, but she read it as apology and recognition. One evening, as the sky outside was the color of cooled metal and the city's noises hummed like distant insects, Leo asked Nadia to sit with him on the steps outside the gym. He had been anxious the way a man is anxious when pride must be rewritten. He had words that seemed to take up space like furniture that must be rearranged. I thought I was proving something today, he said. Instead, I learned how much I didn't know. You were loud about it, Nadia said, stirring the coffee in her hands. The city air smelled of oil and wet asphalt. Loudness can be apprenticeship, too. We all learn. I wanted to be seen, he said. My father. He left when I was small. I thought if I could be the best, I wouldn't be invisible. Nadia's hands were warm around the mug. Trophies make good blankets sometimes, she said. But you can wrap yourself in them and still be cold. He laughed a little. Can you teach me humility? She looked at him as if assessing whether humility could be taught like a stance. I can show you a way to organize it, she said. It's like anything else. Begin small, keep the shape. He took that and kept the shape as best he could. He began to assist in Nadia's small classes, learning to instruct quietness and measured force rather than spectacle. It did not change him overnight, but it settled him. The gym's culture shifted without much drama. The loudest voices learned to fold in their edges. The quiet ones were not granted invisibility, but a chance to speak. People in the neighborhood told the story in different versions. Some called it a miracle. Others said it was a lesson on pride. Nadia did not like either framing. For her, it was simply a night when the ordinary arranged itself in a new pattern. The city did not stop being what it was. Machines kept clanking and buses kept swearing in the streets. The gym was still a place where punches were traded and bruises showed up like small medals on ribs. But the ring had been reminded that it was, ultimately, a place for learning. Months later, a young woman from the neighborhood told Nadia that she had finally been able to sleep through the night since learning how to breathing and make space. Small practical things Nadia taught by rote. The woman's gratitude was deep and unadorned. It landed in Nadia's chest and warmed her in a way that no applause ever had. She had not wanted applause. She had wanted quiet usefulness. The day Leo won a small regional tournament and then lost in the finals, he told Nadia first. He had been nervous to tell her that he had fought poorly in some rounds and that his performance, the one he had trained to be, had been uneven. She listened without spectacle and then handed him a towel. "You did better than you think," she said. He frowned. "You were being kind." "Maybe," she said. "But also, sometimes learning will feel like losing until it stops." He looked down into the towel as if it was an older sibling giving an awkward hug. "I don't want to be the man who proves himself to men," he said. "I want to be the man who proves himself to himself. And to others," she added gently. "But start with yourself." The gym, like a slow animal, took to the idea. It learned that showing someone the door was not the same as kicking them out. The way a single woman could show a man his edge was not to humiliate, but to reflect. People returned to training with less bravado and more curiosity. Fights still happened, of course. Sometimes they were as ugly as the city itself. But the gulf between humiliation and lesson narrowed. There were nights Nadia still dreamed of a ring that was a different color, a bright place of possibility, where she was younger and the stakes were different. In those dreams she moved, and the crowd felt like warm wind. She woke early, made coffee, and swept the mats. The world remained loud and complicated. She kept her vows because they were not dramatic but necessary. Promises were not monuments, but small things to keep in the pocket of each ordinary day. In the end, the gym's silence on the morning of the fight was not a single event but a hinge. It turned the tired, habitual anatomy of an ordinary place and opened a view into what people might be if they were given a mirror instead of an audience. The black belt's joke had been a misstep because it presumed ownership of a narrative. But the reaction, the patient, careful correction of that presumption, was the real instruction. At the closing of the day, when the lights dimmed and the mats lay flat like waiting pages, Marco locked the front door and left a coin on the counter. Nadia took it, tucked it into her apron where it warmed against the other things she kept there, a small photograph of a far-off brother, a recipe for empanadas, a folded ticket stub from a fight she'd never talk about. She stepped into the street, and the city folded around her like a chorus that knew the words now. The gym would continue to ring and heal and bruise. Life would do what life did. But there was now a place where assumptions went to be taught respect, and that was, she thought, enough.